Okay, this is, when I first picked up this one at the list, I thought, well, it'd be quite straightforward, but it's really very interesting actually. First of all, I think we need to get a bit of background, remind ourselves just exactly who we're talking about. We're talking about Judas Iscariot, and we need to look at his mindset and his character to get a good answer to this question, I think. So let's just remind ourselves a bit about Judas. So if we go firstly to John chapter 12, Jesus' feet, then one of his disciples, and it names him Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which should betray him. So that's an indication. This is a man that's going to betray him. So pay attention, really. I think it's being said there. Why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? That's a fair comment. It looked like a waste of money in human sense, didn't it? It's just poured away and wasted. But then we're told, this he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the bag and bear what was put therein. So right from the start, Judas was trying to make something out of his association with Jesus. To start with, it was monetary gain. Then I think his mindset changed and he began to think, if I manoeuvre Jesus into this position, I'll force his hand, or get him arrested, then surely he'll act as a Messiah. Surely he'll drive the Romans out of Israel. Something along those lines. But it started filthy lucre, didn't it? The love of money. But then, of course, sadly, it progressed, didn't it? If we go to Mark chapter 4 and verse 1. Mark chapter 14 and verse 1. I think this is a very telling couple of verses we're going to look at. Mark 14 verse 1. After 2 days was the feast of Passover and of unleavened bread. And the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might take him by craft, Jesus, and put him to death. But they said, not on the feast day, lest there should be an uproar of the people. So the religious leaders were looking, we know, to arrest Jesus on any pretext. But they knew that it was politically fraught, there would be a kickback from it, possibly rebellion from the people. So they were stumped, really. But, verse 10, and Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went unto the chief priests to betray him unto them. And they were very glad, and promised to give him money, and he sought how he might conveniently betray him. So he's gone from being a thief now to being a traitor. What we need to note there is it was Judas that approached the leaders. The leaders didn't go out and say, to the disciples, if we can do a deal with you. Judas actually physically went to them at a very opportune time, and they went, this is better than we thought. We've got one who's going to betray him. Not only that, but we also know that he devised a plan. It says that Judas from that point began to work out a plan of how to betray Jesus. So it wasn't a sudden thought that he had. It was slowly developed over a little while. I think at least 2 or 3 days before the actual betrayal. I think after probably about 2 or 3 days before the betrayal, he got the plan concrete in his head. And he also, of course, he bartered a price for Jesus' life. The other thing we need to consider, of course, is that it was Judas that chose to refuse the escape route, or the get-out clause, if I could use that expression, that Jesus offered a number of times. When Jesus washed the disciples' feet, there was a chance for Judas to change his mind. Jesus was saying, become a servant. This is what you must be, humble. Put yourself before others. It didn't have any effect on Judas. When Jesus told the disciples that one of them would betray him, they went into a state of shock, and they said to each other, is it? And they actually said to the Lord, is it I? Now I think about Judas there was on the spot, wasn't he? Because if he didn't also say, Lord, is it I? He would stand out, wouldn't he? So he had to put a lie and say, Lord, is it I? Well, imagine his heart would be pounding away there, because Jesus could have easily said, well, actually, yes, it is you, Judas, in front of the disciples, but he didn't. But there was an opportunity for Judas to change his mind, to abort the plan, if you like. And then, of course, there was the last time when the sop was offered, and he chose to, again, reject Jesus. And it was probably then that the refusal of the sop was what triggered the final stages of the betrayal, because we know he went out into the night, didn't he? And spiritually, I suppose, he overstepped the line. There was no return after that. And what did Jesus say? Something what that you're going to do it quickly now. Let's get this finished. You go and do what you need to do, Judas. So that was there. Now in John 13, which is where the question comes from. John 13 and verse 2 says, "And the supper being ended, the devil, having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him." Now that, if you just read that in that version on its own, it sounds as though that somebody had put the idea suddenly into his heart to go and do it. And I did a little research here. The word devil there in Strong's is 1228, which means what we normally associate, the word accuser. Okay, but that comes from the root word, quite interestingly, from 1225, one who brings hostile charges. I found that quite interesting, because who was bringing hostile charges against Jesus? The religious leaders, weren't they? Okay. And also there, when it says put into his heart, the NIV actually translates it for once more accurately. The NIV says, "The evening meal was being served, and the devil, the accuser, those who were putting hostile charges against Jesus, and had already prompted Judas, Simon's son." So there it's referring to external forces. You know, they prompt him, they egged him on to do this. Okay, external forces. So that's an external force there. Okay, that was prompting on Judas, I think, along the line that he was going. If we go to verse 23, we read, that's a typo then. "And after the sup, Satan entered into him. Then said Jesus unto him, That thou doest do quickly." Now the word Satan here is adversary. Okay, but was it, you know, I think this was an internal Satan, an internal thing here, because what was, let's look at another example, well known to us in Matthew chapter 16 to explain this. Matthew chapter 16, verse 21. "From that time forth began Jesus to show unto his disciples how he must go into Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised again the third day." Now they'd reached that point, hadn't they, more or less. "Then Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, Be far from it, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. But he turned and said unto Peter, Get thee behind me, Satan, thou art an offence unto me, for thou savest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men." And it wasn't Peter himself, was it, that Jesus was sort of calling Satan? It was the idea in Peter's head, the thought in Peter's head that was the Satan, wasn't it? Not Peter actually physically himself, it was the thought, the idea. So with Judas, again, it was the idea, the Satan, that made him step over the line. He'd actually decided at that point, I'm going to do it now. I'm going to go to the religious leaders and trigger the betrayal. That's it now, I'm going. Okay, I can't turn back. Jesus said, go quickly. There's no turning back now. It's going to happen. And that was the Satan that entered into Judas, I believe. So the answer to the question is, I think, primarily it was an internal Satan, devil, whatever you like. But it was encouraged by external forces. So it's a bit of a cop-out, really. But basically, of course, we know it was an internal idea, an internal thought that germinated right at the start of the ministry, based on greed, based on the need for power, to force his agenda through. And unfortunately it went far beyond what Judas himself, I thought, believed. Because if you look at his reaction when he discovers what's actually happened, he goes and obviously ends his life. There's a lot been written about it. Some people say that he, as I say, he was trying to force Jesus' hand. Maybe the high priest and religious leaders said something on, okay, you bring him to us, we'll make sure he has a fair trial. Okay, we'll look after him, don't worry, he'll have a fair, good trial, and whatever happens. But of course, ultimately he was conned in, wasn't he, and tricked in to the situation. Thank you very much.